Hi, welcome back to Teach to Resist. I'm Dr. Lyndze Harvey, and today I'm going to start a video series, hopefully shorter videos. I'm a bit long-winded sometimes, but this series of videos is going to be on the idea of choosing connection over compliance. And this is a difficult choice to make, and it takes practice and a bit of a mindset shift. So I'm going to take you through what is stopping us from making that mindset shift. The fact that that mindset shift even has to occur is sometimes one of the things that stops us. We're not really sure about that. And, some of the myths and stories that keep us focusing on compliance rather than noticing connection as another possibility. So today I'm going to get into the answer and the question. The answer is one that we already know. The question is something we do somewhat unconsciously most of the time, and I want to draw our attention to it. So before I begin, I just want to review briefly this idea of praxis, which is central to Teach to Resist, central to the way in which I think about and confront a lot of these ideas. So what we're trying to do is shift from the same old thinking and the same old results. Now, sometimes the same old thinking leads us to what we think of as new practices or new methods, but it turns out that the thinking behind those methods may be disconnected. And so we end up with the same results. What I'm asking us to do is to consider praxis. So this is the idea of that interconnected, interdependent theory, action, reflection element. So we think about our thinking, we think about what we do, we see whether they align or disconnect in some way. Usually they connect, but sometimes one of them undermines or subverts the other. And we pull back and we reflect on that. We feel vulnerable, we lean into that, and we try to think about a way in which we can reconnect our theory and practice. This is a really challenging thing to do. And today you may feel a bit unsettled. And that's just an indication that your theory and action aren't aligned. And we all have these experiences. Whether or not we lean in and get vulnerable is the tricky part. So I always begin this workshop when I do it in person or virtually, but live, with this question: what characteristics, habits, and beliefs am I trying to foster in my kid or kids or students? So, what do I want my kid or student to walk away from my nest or my classroom with? What do I want them to take with them into the world? What does the world need more of? And oftentimes, when I'm asking this question, I try to remind people that we're thinking about long-term goals. What skills we want people to develop, what characteristics, habits, and beliefs we want them to develop over time that they take with them into the world and into their lives. And when I ask this question, I usually get this similar answers every time, not the exact same words, maybe, but synonyms of these words. People say things like, I want my kid or students to walk away with an understanding of what patience is, being respectful and warm, independent, caring, honest, generous, thoughtful, just. We want our children to know what justice is and to be just. Problem solvers, confidence, loving, empathetic, fair, responsible. We want them to be loving and creative and kind, open minded, a team player, someone you can work with, compassionate, strong, adventurous. And there are so many other ideas that fall in line with this. And what I hear when I hear these words over and over and over again is that one of our goals, our long term goals, is that children and students learn that they have a freedom to be fully human. And that this freedom to be fully human is not just their own freedom, but it is a relationship with their freedom and the freedom of others. For example, we want children to be respectful to themselves and to others. We want them to learn to care for themselves and to be caring to others. We want them to learn to be independent and to respect the independence of others and allow others their freedom to be independent. We want them to be honest with themselves and others, and so on. So you can look at all of these ideas, these characteristics, beliefs, and habits that we want our children to embody for themselves and others. So, this freedom to be fully human is not just based on freedom, but also equality. Everyone should have the capacity and ability to exercise these characteristics for themselves and others. What I have never heard from people when I do this exercise are these words. No one's ever listed that they want children or students to walk away with the characteristics of being docile, obedient, subservient, or self centered. And no one has ever disagreed with or felt uncomfortable with this idea that the freedom to be fully human is for everyone. And when we think about these words, docility, obedience, subservience, and self centered, it really places the characteristic on one person. So there's only freedom to be fully human for some people. And that doesn't really fit with the narrative here in Canada, more or less among this pluralistic democratic or so-called democratic society we live in. So when I come back to these words, I think, okay, this is what we want. This is our theory, this is our belief, it's our goal, our long-term goals. But unfortunately, something gets in our way. Something distracts us from these ideas, from focusing on these as our long-term goals. So this distraction relates to those words, docile, obedient, subservient, and self-centered. This relates to our question. So if the answer, what do we want for our kids, is for them to be fully human, to have the freedom to be fully human, to acknowledge that freedom for themselves and others, that answer is something we know. The question, however, is something we ask ourselves on a daily basis, perhaps more often than we think. How do I get them to do what I want them to do? Are you familiar with this question? I know that I am. I know it comes into my mind and I hear it now and I notice it. And I know that's a time to get curious. To get curious about whether I'm trying to control others and whether that control or that need for compliance is supporting my long-term goals or undermining them. Is what I believe, that idea that people need to be fully human, the freedom to be fully human, is that being supported by this question or being undermined by it? And there are times when we ask this question when it is a reasonable question to ask that makes sense. But more often than not, it is subversive to what our actual long-term goal is. And that is a challenge to hear. So then it brings me back to praxis. I'm always going back to praxis. I get uncomfortable with this idea that I'm trying to control kids. I mean, I'm not saying that teachers or parents or early childhood educators wake up every morning and think, ha ha ha, today's the day I get to control the children all day. No one's thinking that. I hope no one's thinking that. But we are trying to get kids to do what we want them to do all day long. And are we doing that in a way that reflects what we believe about children, what we believe about ourselves and our role? Is it supporting our goal? So does this practice, I'm going to move my picture here so you can see, does this practice support my goal? Is a question that we can ask. This is a great question for praxis. Is it supporting my long-term goal, the freedom to be fully human? Or is it supporting a short-term goal of compliance? And this brings me to the idea of connection over compliance. The freedom to be fully human is supported through connection. Short-term goal of compliance undermines connection. And I'm going to show you a few examples that I feel really articulate this disconnection. So the first example, I'm going to be moving my picture around a little bit here so that we can see all of the words. My first connection, or my first example, surrounds this disconnection around trying to get kids to do something that they don't want to do. And oftentimes our reasons trump their feelings. And this is difficult to hear, but imagine you are trying to get your toddler's shoes on and you're about to go to the park, you need out, they need out, and they don't want to put these shoes on and they're fighting you on these shoes. I'm sure everyone's been there or some experience like that. And in our frustration or in our exhaustion or in our need to get out, we are almost ramming these shoes on their feet. And we are trying to explain why. Well, honey, you need to have your shoes on because it's a safety thing. We have to have our shoes on to be in the park. This is part of safety. So that's a reasonable explanation as to why these shoes need to be on these feet. Um, but the child is still clearly feeling upset about the shoes being on their feet. And the reasons that I'm giving seem to be more important or taking precedence over their feelings. Children ask why, and we give them reasons. We give them our reasons for why. We often don't talk about our feelings about why. I'm feeling really tired and I really want to get outside to the park because I have so much fun with you there. And I know you don't want to put these shoes on, but I worry about your safety and I don't want your feet to get cut up or for you to be hurt. And I know that it's hard that you don't want to put your shoes on. Children also ask why, and we don't ask them why because we think, well, I know better. The story is we know better as adults. And absolutely, we have more life experience. And a lot of the time, we do know better. But do we know their feelings better than they know them themselves? What if we turn that question around and we play the role of the 2-year-old and ask them, why? Why don't you want to put your shoes on? So in this example, I'm hearing that we aim ourselves towards compliance. How do I get them to do what I want them to do? I reason with them. I know better. I stand my ground. And at the same time, there's opportunity for connection there. There's opportunity to talk about our feelings. There's opportunity to ask them why and have them practice explaining themselves. This is hard for them. We might need to help them along with that language. Um, and it's acknowledging that they're fully human. They're a fully human person who knows themselves. And I know more about safety than my 2-year-old, but they know a lot about their feelings and the way their feet feel in those shoes. So that opportunity for connection often gets missed. Another thing that we do on a regular basis is give choices. You can have this apple or you can have these cookies. And maybe we connect those choices to a reward or a punishment. You can have this apple and you can have all these cookies later, or you can have one cookie now. So I'm going to move my picture once again. When we're thinking about choices, we're thinking, okay, I'm encouraging decision making. This is something that I want my child to learn. It's part of my long-term goals. So when I'm encouraging decision making through choices, that seems to really make sense to me. Of course, I'm going to give my kids choices. I'm promoting their autonomy. Absolutely. They're getting to make that decision themselves. What a great practice for them. And I'm supporting their freedom. And I put freedom in quotations here because I define freedom differently than people getting to do what they want to do. I think about freedom in terms of my needs and your needs and considering both. And again, in this example of choice, we aren't expressing our needs. We aren't listening to their needs. We are simply giving them a choice. Do this and you get this, or do this and you get this. Alfie Cohen calls this a pseudo-choice. He says, what we're getting here is not real. It's not really a choice. It's more like a test. Figure out what I want you to do. It's obvious. I want you to eat this apple, and you'll get a reward for eating the apple. Is one of the options punishment? And going back to that idea of the shoes, trying to get your toddler out the door, well, you put on these shoes and we can go to the park. If you don't put on these shoes, then you'll have to go down for a nap. Is that really a choice? Do this option and we get to have fun. Choose this option and you're more or less being punished. There's a withdrawal of my care. That's not really a choice. One of those options is compliance, and the other option is compliance. Neither of those options have connection built in. Is there dialogue? Again, going back to the example of the shoes, we could start asking questions. We could start listening. That's an example of dialogue. In this option of pseudo choice, do this and you get this, do that and you get that. There isn't a discussion. There isn't an opportunity for dialogue. Natural consequences. So when I think about natural consequences, I get a little frustrated because natural consequences aren't natural. And one example is, your child's leaving, it's a rainy day, and you notice that their umbrella's in the corner, and you say, oh, don't forget your umbrella. And they're packing their lunch and they're getting on their boots and they walk out the door and you notice their umbrella is still there. And you think, well, natural consequence, they're going to get wet. They didn't listen to me. I reminded them. Is this a natural consequence? We think, okay, I'm teaching values. I'm teaching them to be responsible. I'm teaching them to listen. I'm teaching them what it's like if you don't have an umbrella. I'm thinking that I am teaching them to plan ahead. But in reality, I'm withdrawing and withholding. I notice that their umbrella is still there. If it were my friend, I would say, I'd grab their umbrella and I would say, oh, hey, just you forgot your umbrella. I would understand that they got a little bit lost in getting ready and getting out the door. Maybe they're late. Maybe they're feeling the constraints of time. But with a child, we don't see that as a reasonable option. And depending on our mood, we might contrive this consequence for them. And I'll get back to withdrawing and withholding in just a moment. We think, okay, they're learning through mistakes, which is absolutely valid. We do learn through mistakes. But is this a natural mistake? And is there another lesson that we could be teaching them? So I like to think of this as contrived. This is a contrived example of a consequence. There are natural consequences, absolutely. Natural consequence might be, we're out and about and a child walks through a puddle and the water goes over their boots and into their boots. That's experiencing a natural consequence. They misjudged how deep that puddle is. The water went into their boots. They're going to learn from that example. But when it's contrived by us, that's the problem. So maybe we can teach natural consequences in a different way, one that is built with connection and not about compliance. In the first example, I'm trying to get them to do what I want them to do. I'm withdrawing my care, withholding my love, withholding my care. In this example here, and this picture went viral a few years back, I see somebody teaching their child caring. I see someone teaching their child giving. I see someone teaching their child about patience and responsibility. I am responsible for you, my child, and I care deeply about you, and I will get wet to protect you. even though you forgot your umbrella. I'm not withdrawing. I am not withholding. I am connecting. I'm teaching them values. I'm learning through maybe my own mistake. And I'm modeling that. And I'm learning through connection. You can see the connection in that picture. And that would feel quite good and cold and wet, but good. The last example I want to give is good job. And again, this is from alfiecohen.org in his wonderful article, 5 Reasons to Stop Saying Good Job. And if you watched my video on praxis and being a praxis mentor, I go through this in detail there. But I'm just going to go through it briefly here. We think, when I give good jobs to my kids, when I say, good job, you climbed up that rock wall, or good job, you went down the slide, or good sliding. We hear this peppered around playgrounds all the time. We hear it in classrooms all the time. We think we're building self-esteem. We are positively and reinforcing certain behavior. We're being encouraging to our kids. And Alfie Cohen states, when he comes down on the idea of praise and good job, in no way, shape, or form is he saying we shouldn't be encouraging our kids or we shouldn't be building their self-esteem. Absolutely, we need to be building self-esteem and encouraging our kids. But he explains, good job isn't doing what we think it's doing. There's a disconnection between what we think it's doing and what it's actually doing. And there's disconnection built inside there. And consequence, or the consequences that we're trying to get compliance. So he explains, well, what we're doing is we're manipulating them for compliance. When I say good job to one of the children sitting on the carpet, good sitting, Sarah. Sarah's ready. Sarah's all ready to go. Look at Sarah. Good job, Sarah. When I do that, other children are manipulated into being compliant, like Sarah. We create praise junkies. It feels really good to be good jobbed temporarily. I get good job for my temporary compliance. And I want that feeling more often. And so I start being more obedient and more docile, more subservient. Those aren't the long-term goals that we're aiming for. And being a praise junkie leads us into being adults who are praise junkies who feel terrible when their boss doesn't notice the good job that they did, when they don't get good jobbed, rather than having that internal praise for myself for the job well done. Stealing a child's pleasure. Alfie Cohen quotes many studies in his work, and he talks about how when people are praised, they're less likely to do that thing again. The excitement and pride that comes with going down the slide is stolen by the praise. And he gives you some other options that you can try. But that seems like a very disconnecting behavior. And we lose interest in the thing that we were doing. If you want to learn more about reasons why we don't need to say good job and other options out there, keep watching this video series, but also try reading this article, 5 Reasons to Stop Saying Good Job, and you can find it at alfiecohen.org. So I've taken you through some of the ideas about what is disconnecting what we believe are long-term goals and what we actually do, which is often focused on that question, how do we get them to do what I want them to do, and compliance being the short-term goal. We want to move ourselves towards those long-term goals, but you may be thinking, what else can I do besides pseudo-choice, besides natural consequences, besides praise, or besides ramming that shoe on my kid's foot because there might be glass at the playground? I am not suggesting that you send your child out into a playground without shoes. But I do have some other ideas on how we can turn our focus to connection over compliance. There are some barriers that get in our way, and the next video is going to take you through some of those barriers. And sometimes we just need to be able to see those barriers in order to confront them and overcome them. So it's a great quotation by Rumi that I want to end on. Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. We have built barriers against that connection, sometimes to protect ourselves, but also these are learned behaviors. And all the world around us is built on compliance. Connection is often seen as weak and shoved to the background. We think it won't work. And there are many other stories that tell us that connection isn't the way and that compliance is our only option. I want to explore those stories with you in the next video. Again, my name is Lyndze Harvey. You're watching Teach to Resist. If you like this video or if you have some questions, you can comment below. You can also like the video and please subscribe. Thanks so much.